Alright, hey everybody, in today's video I'm going to show you how to use 3 different vintage light meters that have slightly different interfaces. We've got a Gossen Pilot 2, we've got a Sekonic, which is the same model as the last time I made a video about this, which this video will replace that old one. And then we've got another more complicated Sekonic. So this is the light meter I used to use when I would need to meter for 4x5. This is now the one that I use because it's a little bit different. And what we're going to do is go over these. I'm going to show you how each of them works and how to read what they're telling you. So if you have one that is similar to these, it will work in basically the same way. We're going to start with the Gossen and then go that way. Okay, so here we have the Gossen. I think it's how it's pronounced. Pilot 2 light meter. So the way that this works functionally is that on the front of it there's a light meter cell right there. You can see those. If I can get them in focus, that looks good. You can see that there are those cells. That's what actually does the meter reading. And then on the side we have this sliding thing right here that moves this cover up in front. This is for incident reading, and that's for reflective reading. So then down here on the bottom, what we've got is a needle, and the needle there, the thin silver one, moves with the light readings, and then the yellow one is adjusted as we dial in this ring. So what we're going to do is I'm going to use my cell phone flashlight here to simulate a meter reading. And as you can see with the light here in front of it, that needle goes all the way over to the end. So that needle is going to adjust as there's more or less light. That's the way that all of these work in principle. To use the calculator, this circular disc is just a calculator. First thing we need to do is dial in this says ASA. ASA and ISO are the same thing. So 100 ASA is the exact same as 100 ISO. Today we use ISO. So you can dial in a film speed from 5, which is really, really slow. That's ortho film right there, up to 3200. So all this is going to do, and you can see as I adjust the dial here, what that's doing is adjusting where the aperture falls on this shutter speed ring. So this outer ring moves the shutter speeds. This inner ring moves your aperture numbers and your ISO. So let's say we're going to shoot 100 ISO. Okay, that's fine. And so if we go back to where that needle was when I shined my cell phone flashlight in front of the light meter, it was right about there. What that tells us is that f5.6 is 1/60th of a second. So when you line up your needle right there with your little yellow arrow like that, anything up at the top that is aligned will now give you a proper exposure. So 1/15th of a second, is that what that is? Yeah. At f22 will give you a proper exposure, just like 1/1000th of a second at f2.8. So each of these different combinations up at the top is the same amount of light reaching your film. What this tells you also is that if you want to shoot at f2 or f1.4 with this reading, you're going to need a camera that has a shutter speed faster than 1/1000th of a second. At f2 it would be 1/2000th, and at f1.4 it would be 1/4000th of a second. Now, for cameras with shutter speeds that quick, they all have electronic meters, so there's no real reason for a handheld meter like this to go that fast. With those advanced newer cameras with really, really fast shutter speeds, if the light meter isn't working, the rest of the camera isn't working. The two exceptions I can think of to that rule are the Minolta XK and or X1 as it was called in some markets, and the Mamiya DTL 2000, both of which reached 1/2000th of a second and had meters that if they failed wouldn't prevent the rest of the camera from working. So that's how we use this. Basically, what you do is you dial in your ISO, your ISO, and then you take your meter reading and you use this outer dial to line up your yellow needle with the meter reading needle, and then you look at these combinations here to see what combination is going to work for the light that you have in your scene. This is the basic process by which all three of these light meters are going to work. This is the Gossen, or Gossen, however it's pronounced, just happens to be the simplest of the three. Alright, so the second light meter that we're going to look at is the Sekonic L6. L stood for liter, and this was a mid-1950s light meter, and it's a similar design in that on the front we have a light meter reading cell right here, but instead of having an incident cover, it has a flip down cover, and it just flips up and down by pushing this little button, and I'll show you how this cover matters in just a second. This is a slightly more complicated looking calculator, and it's a little bit harder to interpret. First thing that we're going to do is we're going to dial in our film speed. Now the 100, these numbers are ASA film speeds. Again, same exact thing as ISO. So if you're using 100 ISO film, we set it to 100 ASA. This light meter range is from 6, I think it is. Yeah, 6 ISO up to, I don't remember what the top end is, probably 1600. Nope, 800. So this goes 6 to 800. So we're going to leave it at 100. Then, since we're indoors, we're going to flip the top up. If you're indoors or in shade or something like that, you flip up the top if it's a heavily cloudy day. If you're outside in full sun, at the beach, in snow, then you're going to take your meter reading with the top down. So what we've got here is a scale that goes from 0 to 8. And those correspond with the aperture numbers on the outer ring here. So if we take a meter reading and we say, let's say that it's going to be let's do a meter reading for real, off one of the studio lights with the top open. It says F45. So, okay, so we find this open line right here, and we're going to line up the 4/5 with the open. Any one of these combinations now should be accurate. So let's do a spot check. 1/60th is saying about F6.3. So if that is within a stop of what the Gossen or Gossen says, then we know that this is pretty good. And the Gossen Pilot 2 is telling us off the same studio light that it would be about F6.3 for the studio light at 100 ISO. So now we know that we're reading that correctly. Okay, so what about the top open? I'm sorry, we did that with the top open for that reading. Let's say we were outside in full sun and we had the top closed, and we had the same thing of F4.5, or of 4.5 rather. In that case, all you would do is put the 4.5 over the closed number, and now you have a whole different range here. And what that's telling you is there's a ton more light, because that is a very tiny little slit in front of this thing. So at 1/60th of a second, you're going to need to be at around F32. And so that's how this calculator works. Those numbers correspond to your aperture number, and you line up your aperture number with open or closed depending on how you're taking your meter reading, and that gives you the correct possible combination of settings for your lighting condition. And again, as we saw before, if we line this back up with with F5.6 or whatever it was being at 1/60th, let's say we have the numbers dialed in correctly. If you wanted to shoot at 1/1000th, you'd have to use F14. If you wanted to shoot at F16, you'd have to use 10, 1/10th of a second. So any of these different combinations, again, is an equivalent amount of light reaching your film, and it's just a matter of using any one of these combinations to get a proper exposure with your setting. This guy right here, this is a Sekonic, what model number is this? does it say? A Sekonic K31 Model 38. This is the most advanced light meter that I use, but it's fundamentally the same thing as we just saw with the L6 in a different package that's a little bit more streamlined and easier to read. I like this one because it's also got the most options for lighting conditions. So, if you remember from the Pilot 2, it had that needle system down at the bottom. Here we have a similar system at the bottom. There's that thin needle is going to react to the light, and then this circle is going to be adjusted as the dials are rotated. Now you'll see here there's closed, open, and amp. What I'm going to do is rotate this plastic dial, and now if I line up that red dot with closed, open, or amp, that gives me closed, open, amp, right, like that. So we have 3 different light meter settings depending on how much light is available for use. Okay, so to actually use this now, again we're going to dial in our ASA, which is the same thing as ISO, and this light meter goes from 6 again to as fast as 3200. So a good range on this light meter. We're going to set it to 100 just to keep everything nice and consistent. And let's take a light meter reading off of the studio light, and we're going to get that dialed in. Would help if I had that set correctly. There we go. Get that dialed in. Okay, we can close the top back up again. We're going to, now we know we have this set. This is now retaining all of the settings that we have available to us. So this, oh, by the way, one nice thing about this for those of you in Europe, it also tells you the DIN. So up here we have your movie settings for if you're using a movie recording. Those are also on the L6. I glanced, I blew right past them, apologize for that. But at any rate, here's your light level in exposure value units. And now down here, these are all of your combinations for shutter speed. So if we see here at f2.8, 1/1000th of a second. At f16, 1/30th of a second. Now interestingly, this is a much different reading than we saw with our Pilot 2. So let's compare these again and see where I screwed up. So the Pilot 2 is dialed in correctly, and I think it was just my angle was off. That looks pretty darn close to correct. So it looks like, nope, there we go. That's it. No, that's not it. That's it. It's as accurate as it's going to be. Ah, okay. So I see what the issue was that the studio light is dim enough that I had to switch over to amp, and that's why I was getting 2 stops under exposure for the reading. Now if I switch over to amp, open up the amp, and take the light meter reading, now we get correct readings of 100 ISO, f5 6th and a 60th of a second, which jives with the Pilot 2. So the Sekonic K1 Model 38 is a little bit more of an advanced camera, but personally I think it's got one of the better readouts in terms of the way it presents information. The Pilot 2, of course, is the simplest of all 3 of them to read. So that's 3 different ways that vintage light meters are used and how to operate the calculator on the front of them. The general format and layout of all vintage light meters with this shape is that they take a meter reading, they have a couple needles, and then they have a calculator that tells you what your settings need to be. So the important part is getting everything dialed in correctly so that then you can use your aperture and shutter speed combination options to get a proper exposure. Thank you for watching this video. Please give me a thumbs up. That lets me know that I'm on the right track producing content which is useful and helpful to you. If you have any questions or comments, please leave those in the comments section below. I'm pretty good about checking these every couple of days and answering questions. If you have any suggestions or ideas for future videos, and if I have the technical know-how and equipment, I'm more than happy to make those. One last thing, thank you everyone for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. I gotta get up, Steinbeck. I have to turn off the camera.